Welcome to the Damascus Road podcast. On the road to Damascus, Paul had a radical encounter with Jesus and his life was changed forever. That is what we hope and pray for here. Now, on to this week's episode. I have a couple problems. The first of which is that a week ago, I got shingles. You know that thing that they warn old people about? So you can insert your own joke there. But they hurt. Shingles suck. And so I am kind of always in pain, but then there's like this really sharp stabbing pain that comes. So if at any point that I'm up here, you see me stop, you see me cringe, you see me wince, you see me grab my side, I am, I guess, generally okay. You don't need to worry for me. That is what's going on. It just might happen because the pain is so incredibly unpredictable that it might happen when I'm speaking. So I just wanted to give you a heads up there. Don't be like, Dave just stopped in the middle of a sentence. Yeah, that's what that would be. The other problem I have is not a big problem. Is it a serious problem? Again, no. But it is a problem. And that problem is I cannot stop looking at orangutan pictures on Instagram. Not where you thought this was going, huh? I'm sure if you had made a list of the things you thought I was going to talk about here this Sunday morning in my message, orangutan Instas would probably at least be outside of the top 10. But it's true. I cannot get enough of orangutan pictures on Instagram. And I don't even know how this problem started. I have no idea what random algorithm started on Instagram that started pushing orangutans into my feed. All I know is one day I happened upon an account called Orangutan Delight, and my life was changed forever. Here's a sampling of some of the top shelf content pushed out by the fine people or person behind Orangutan Delight. Their most featured orangutan is this little guy named Buddy. Here he is. I know. He's taking a nap. You're welcome. They've got this friggin' champ taking a bath, and I dare you to find a cuter thing on the internet. Here's Buddy again, but this time he's just really close. Want to see an orangutan wearing a watermelon as a hat? Boom, they've got you covered. They cross-posted this dude who is a whole mood, and probably my spirit animal come most Friday evenings. Ever seen a wheelbarrow full of orangies? There, now you have, and you will never be the same. And one last time for good measure, here's Buddy again, and I don't have any additional comment. That's just, I mean, how can you not love this guy? I would love to meet the person or people behind Orangutan Delight because I'd love to know how they have all the time to curate all this orange ape content. Are they retired? Are they a stay-at-home parent? Are they a student? Are they merely just unemployed? How do they find the time to scour the internet for the best of the best in orangutan photography? I have my normal Instagram account, and last summer I started a secondary Instagram account where I would rank bands' discographies, and I was really excited about it at first. And it lasted exactly 1 month and 15 posts, and then I just didn't feel like I had the time for it anymore. So thank you, Orangutan Delight, for being dedicated, for taking in the time and putting in the time, for finding the orangutan pictures to be the temporary salve to my busy life over and over and over again. Now, you might not turn to Instagram accounts filled with adorable orangutans, but I'm sure you still have something that you do to ease your stress and get relief from your busy life. Because chances are you're busy. Ask anyone how they're doing, and they will most likely answer busy. During the week when my wife texts me to see how my day is going, more times than not, I respond, I'm busy. I could probably take an informal poll of you people here today and ask, who here is busy? And I would venture a guess that most of your hands would go up. Our culture prides itself on being busy. You're not doing it right if you're not working extra hours, have a bunch of extracurricular activities, and a schedule bursting at the seams. It's also almost a cultural sin to not be overwhelmed by our schedules. Why would we rest when there are things to get accomplished, there are deadlines to meet, there are social obligations to keep up with, and a million other things vying for our time and our energy? Pastor and author Tim Suttle puts it this way: In the US, our self-worth is tied up in what we can produce and consume. So being busy, tired, overscheduled, and exhausted is a symbol of status. Time is money, right? Can't have success if you're not putting in the time. And there's only so much time to get it all done. But here's the thing. No one can maintain the American ideal of busyness forever. We might all have different thresholds, but everyone has a wall waiting for a collision out there in front of you somewhere. When we feel ourselves teetering on the brink of exhaustion, we feel like we're screeching to a halt, we try to push through it. We try to make up for our lack of time and energy with caffeine, with technology, another round of Candy Crush or Orangutan Delight, and we try to numb our frazzled brains and weary souls. But does it have to be this way? Do we have no choice but to give in to our culture's expectation to overwhelm our lives? What does God have to say about our busy lives? Can the Bible really have any insight here? Because our lives are so much different than the people who lived thousands and thousands of years ago. Does Jesus call us into a life that is hurried and draining, or does he call us into something greater? As we continue our series on simplicity this morning, series All That Is Needed, we are going to explore how less, not more, in our schedules can lead us into a truly satisfying life and a life that Jesus longs for us to embrace. Some 58 years ago, the Rolling Stones famously sang, "Time is on my side." But I venture a guess that most of us feel the exact opposite, that time is actively working against us, and that there is never enough of it. We have become so accustomed to building a schedule that works against us, and we have hardly time to even notice that we're doing it anymore. We can no longer distinguish our unhealthy rhythms from our healthy ones. Our bosses, our coworkers, our teachers, and our classmates, they care how we're spending our time. We set our schedules and our life rhythms to appease them, often pushing God to the side. But God cares how we spend our time too. So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most out of every opportunity in these evil days. We like to think of ourselves as wise and not foolish, right? But are our busy schedules allowing us to make the most out of every opportunity that we have? Our time is a precious gift from God, and though we don't often like to think about it that much, none of us know how much of our time we have left. It's important that we think through how we are spending our time so we can make the most of it and not waste it. But of course, that is easier said than done when the demands of life keep coming at us no matter what. Before we figure out how to reduce our busyness, simplify our schedules, and fill our time with more kingdom-focused practices, we must examine the reasons why we are filling our lives to the brim. We like to think of our hectic lives as the sickness. The busyness is the sickness. But the reality is, it is really a symptom of other deeply rooted things going on inside of us. We just finished a series a couple weeks ago on looking at the lies the enemy tries to get us to believe about our lives and the world, and how he uses those lies to distract us and pull us away from God. Our schedules are no different, and there are lies that the enemy tells us, that the world tells us, and that we even tell ourselves that push us to stay busy. So let's look at some of these lies this morning that we are sold that keep our lives overwhelmed and what God has to say about them. So lie number one, accolades will bring fulfillment, and being busy makes me important. Our thinking goes like this: the busier we are, the more we can accomplish and the more respect we can earn. Therefore, the more respect and accolades that we receive, the more we can prove our worth and value to others. But the Bible counters this narrative and motivation. Work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than people. Remember that the Lord will give you an inheritance as your reward, and that the master you are serving is Christ. Unfortunately, if we are trying to find fulfillment in someone else's opinion of us, we will never find it. We will always be searching, working, and wanting more and more and more. Yet Christ offers true peace and a reward greater than anything the world can provide. Any accolades we receive from our employers, teachers, coworkers, classmates pales in comparison to everything we get from God. Christ already loves us more than we could imagine. There's nothing we could do to change that. See how very much our Father loves us, for he calls us his children, and that is what we are. Serving Jesus, not others, can free us from the trap of constantly wanting and needing more and more recognition and staying busy to do so. And remember, this starts with the simplicity of heart like Megan talked about last week. We are talking about serving God with our hearts, not just filling our time with more service to the point that we're hurried still and we're serving out of frantic faithfulness. Serving God means having an undivided heart and saying no to some things to protect that. Lie number 2 of our busyness is money will bring happiness. We often get caught up in needless busyness because of our desire to earn and secure more money. The promise of working extra hours and earning overtime pay maybe is enticing. The world has been dealing with some pretty bad inflation recently, so having a little extra money will help ease the stress of the rising costs that we're seeing. But just like searching for accolades from others, stressing our schedules for money alone will never be enough. Those who love money will never have enough. How meaningless to think that wealth brings true happiness. The more you have, the more people come to help you spend it. So what good is wealth except perhaps to watch it slip through your fingers? Yes, we need money to survive. No, it is not inherently bad to pick up an extra shift at work or work some extra hours or even have a well-paying job. But it cannot be our focus and driving force. More does not mean a higher quality of life. The job that pays more makes you work more hours. The nice things you want to buy take more money to buy and take more money to maintain. So again, we find ourselves working more hours to maintain them and to afford them. It's a never-ending loop of more. However, if we simplify our schedules, we could escape this paradox. Remember the words of Jesus that Megan reminded us of last week. You cannot serve both God and money. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be. And he summed up his illustration about the rich farmer this way. Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God. My work has been quite busy the last month or so much so that it was very appropriate that I was writing this message at the exact same time. I've had plenty of days where I've had to go in early and then I've left late and even had to go in on the weekends some to help with some other projects. Through it all, I kept telling myself, well, at least the paycheck will be nice, right? And yes, the money was nice and it was important for me to provide for my family. But I would have much rather been spending that time with my family instead of just making money for them. We would have been fine without the extra money on my paycheck, and we would have had a little bit healthier life rhythm as well. But through working and focusing on the money a little bit, I was also believing the next lie of our busy lives, which is lie number 3. I don't have a choice. Many of us live over busy lives because of the expectations and demands put on us by others. In these cases, it's important to remember you always have a choice. I have felt like over the last month that I really didn't have a choice but to work a bunch of extra hours that I did. Some of the time, actually most of the time, no one was asking me to put in those extra hours. I just felt that I would never catch up if I didn't put them in myself. Felt I had no choice but sacrifice sleep and some sanity to get all my work done. But was that really the case? Most days, not all days, but I would say most days, I did catch up just fine with extra time to spare in my day. So was I ultimately making a choice that I did not have to make? Now, there were also instances where my boss asked everyone in the shop to come and put in an extra 3 to 4 hours on the weekend so every department could help each other get caught up. That's when you really feel like you don't have a choice, right? When the boss is asking, yeah. But I'm telling you that you do still have some sort of choice there. I did go in that weekend. My boss asked, I'm a team player. I went in. But I only went in for the 3 hours, the minimum amount that she asked for. I chose the minimum time requested because I knew it would be at least a little bit healthier for me and my family. I chose to prioritize the rest and that I could rest as much as I could in the presence of God, even with that extra hour, because that would bring a little more peace to my otherwise busy life. And just like the Psalms tell us, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. This is the peace that resting in God can bring. I saw and heard coworkers talking about putting in 2 full days that weekend. And I understand why they did it. They probably felt like they had no choice. They probably were looking at the money. I get it. But I wish they had realized that they had more of a choice than they thought they did. Our hurried state is a choice. Therefore, we can choose to slow down. When we choose to slow down, we will see the peace that pace of life brings. When we don't, we buy into the next lie that my coworkers and I so often succumb to, is that lie number 4, I am needed. Pride is defined as holding an excessively high opinion of oneself or one's importance. And it leads to an overwhelmed schedule because of the foolish thinking that follows it. Nobody can do what I can do. This pride affects the way we view our business, our work, our family, and our personal relationships. Left unchecked, it leads to a busy life and, in the end, a fall. Pride leads to disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. We may feel important. We may feel like we're needed. We may really like feeling that we're needed and that nobody else can do what we do. But it's not good for our families or ourselves to value our importance and competence above our health and our relationships. God calls us to know ourselves, to know our limits, and to know what we are good at and what we aren't good at in every aspect of our life. Don't think that you are better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. So 2 weeks ago, pre-shingles, right in the middle of this busy season at work, I threw out my back. I tweaked it at work, didn't feel great, but it was all right. And then it went all the way out that night, like completely out, like it felt like my back literally exploded. And while the excruciating pain that I was in will tell you that there's never a good time for your back to go out, there's never like, oh yeah, this is a perfect timing. It was especially bad timing for work. There were people on my team at work that were on vacation, so we all had their work divvied up amongst us, the rest of us who were left, and we were all covering each other's work at that point. The last thing I wanted to do was add more to their busyness. I was convinced that I was needed at work, but I couldn't walk. So I ultimately had to call my supervisor and tell her I'm not making it in and apologize profusely. I had no choice but to stay home at least for a day. And between muscle relaxer-induced naps that day, I was racked with guilt for not being at work. It was like this little extra torture, like thrown in with the back pain. But you know what? When I returned to work that next day after I was off, everyone survived. They were fine. From the moment I walked in the door that day, all my coworkers, all the people on my team, they were much more concerned with how I was doing than with the fact that they had to do some extra work the previous day. No one literally said anything to me about what they did or didn't cover on my desk. And that was beyond humbling and appreciated by me, probably more than they'll ever know. Now, while my back issues are hereditary, and they weren't really a result of busyness of my life, my body was telling me that I needed to rest. And if we push and push and push ourselves in our schedules, our bodies will eventually find a way to rest. They will. They will shut down. We only have so much time, and we all can only handle so much. Our limits will catch up with us, and our bodies will force us to get the rest that we put off for too long. Lie number 5, everything is important. Our world has a tendency to make everything appear urgent, important, and beneficial to our lives. We fill our schedules because we don't want to disappoint work, school, family, or friends. But even the most productive of us need to realize that nobody can accomplish everything. We only have so many hours in the day, and at some point, some things we feel we want to do, or some things we feel we have to do, will end up falling by the wayside, or at the very least, being set aside for some other time. The reality of our lives is that very few things are actually important. And a lot of the things we put tons of importance on are actually pretty trivial. We need to live our lives in a way where we never sacrifice the important things for the trivial. And Jesus gave us very clear instructions as to what is truly important. Teacher, what is the most important commandment in the law of Moses? Jesus replied, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. Jesus is clear. The things that matter the most is loving God and loving your neighbor. After that, everything else will fall into place and take care of itself. And don't hear me say we have to shuck every single other responsibility we have in favor of just spending time with God and just spending time with our neighbor. We will have other responsibilities to our families, to our friends, employers, coworkers, classmates, school. And good and beautiful work is a part of God's design for our lives. I gave a message earlier this year in our 4 season series on that very thing. There's a lot of crossover between that message and this one. And I encourage you to check it out in the DR podcast. If you go into the Bible app through Church Center, there's a link to it in there. But before we were called to a purpose, before we were called to work, we were called to a person, and that person is Jesus. We have to make a living, we have to pay our bills, and we have to maintain relationships, and we have to set aside time for fun and leisure. These are all valuable and worthwhile things, but if we need to slow and prune some unessential things from our lives, it is good and wise to do so. Our friends will understand if we need to not go out on a Friday night because we've had a long week and we need to prioritize recharging with God. And if I need to leave work right at the end of the day because I've gotten a call or a text from a friend that they're in need, I can leave right on time. I cannot stay late. Sure, my boss may or may not understand that, but those couple of orders I left sitting on my desk, they're not as important as my friend. And they will still be there the next morning when I get to work. And finally, lie number 6 is that quietness is laziness. The more we pack our schedules, the louder the noise in our lives become. And the louder it becomes, the harder it is to differentiate between all the voices that are vying for our attention and time. Our culture sells us the lie that we have to be going at all times. If we take time to slow and quiet our lives, that means we are selfish, that means we are unproductive, and that means we are lazy. But the Bible also counters this narrative. Ecclesiastes tells us that there is a time to be silent and a time to speak, showing us that there is value not just in noise, but in the quiet too. And the Psalms tell us to be still and know that I am God. Notice how it doesn't say, run around crazy and know that I am God. We can't expect to make room for God in our lives if we are not leaving space and quiet to effectively hear him. Quietness is not laziness. Quietness is not unproductive. It is essential to our mental, physical, and spiritual lives that we take time to quiet ourselves and sit in the quiet, comforting presence of God. One of the most beneficial things Jesus modeled for us was his ability and willingness to get away from the noise and spend time in silence, solitude, and prayer with the Father. But despite Jesus' instructions, the report of his power spread even faster, and vast crowds came to hear him preach and to be healed of their diseases. But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. This is just one example. Time and time again in the Gospels, we see Jesus retreat and prioritize quiet time with God. And we can pretty safely say that if it was an important practice for Jesus, it is probably an important practice for us. While the world values loudness and chaos, making room to strip away the noise in our lives in favor of quietness, we will actually be in a fuller life with Jesus if we strip all that away. But as we look at this, it is important to remember that there are ebbs and flows to life. There are seasons that require more of you and more of your time than others. It's just natural. But when we are in the busiest seasons, we need to remove the activities that are neutral and prioritize the life-giving practices of Jesus: silence, solitude, Sabbath, activities that produce joy and life in us. Don't waste the precious resource of your time on something that doesn't fill your soul. Now, none of what I'm saying this morning means that there won't be times that you are busy. Busy or not, remember that seasons should always change. If yours hasn't changed recently and you honestly can't remember a time when you were not busy, you may need to revisit what narratives and what lies you are telling yourself, who is making the decisions for your life, and what you can do to regain some of the control over your schedule. So all of these lies boil down to putting our time, energy, hope, and faith into something other than Jesus and the Father. So what are some things? So now that we know some of the causes and the symptoms of our busyness, what is the cure? What are some things that we can practically do to fight against this? First, and most importantly, if you take nothing else from what I'm going to say, we need to build a God-first schedule. We certainly have a problem filling our schedule with too many things. But sometimes the problem is filling our time with things that are not energizing us, work or activities that are not life-giving. But we need our schedules to reflect and help us become more of who God made us to be instead of reflecting our need for importance as shown by our busyness that keeps us from syncing up with God. We have to ask ourselves, how would God have me spend my time? Because as I said earlier, God cares about how we spend our time. In his book, The Good and Beautiful Life, author James Bryan Smith talks about it this way. To build our lives on the rock of Jesus' teaching, we need to take control of our time instead of letting time control us. The most frequent excuse for not growing in our spiritual lives is lack of time. Most of us live at the mercy of our schedule instead of planning ahead and arranging our schedule around our apprenticeship to Jesus. Where and how we spend our time shapes us. It informs who we are constantly becoming. And God cares about the people we are becoming. If how we spend our time helps shape who we're becoming, then definitely God cares about where our time is going. So if we say we want to be more like Jesus, and our schedules and our time need to reflect that. For the only way we will become more like Jesus is by spending more intentional time with him. You may have noticed, I think, when you came in with the median, did people get the median? You may have got a little extra piece of paper with it. Yes. Awesome. Good. If anybody did not get one of those, raise your hand and we'll have someone pass it out. It looks like we got a couple here. There's some extras. Yeah. Awesome, Megan. Thank you if you could pass those out. There's a little extra handout with the median this morning. Maybe you've looked at it. Maybe you didn't. This is How to Pass a Day Devotionally by Madame Guyon. She was a French author who lived in the late 17th century. She wrote this step-by-step essay to her daughter on how to order her life around her faith. It's a short, simple, and profound way to pause throughout your day to reconnect with God. And there are 8 simple steps. They get some extra sheets passed out. I'll go through just simply the 8 steps here. The first one, step 1, go to bed at a reasonable hour. Step 2, as you wake, present your first thoughts to the Lord. Step 3, after you are dressed for the day, spend a half an hour in devotion. If you don't have one, right, you can put your hand up. So you can get some passed out here. Awesome. Thanks, Meg. Step 4 is never pass the morning without reading some sort of spiritual book. In the 17th century, there weren't audiobooks or podcasts, so we can probably safely substitute something like that in that step as well here for us. Step number 5, when you come from this time of devotion in the morning, be careful not to let your spiritual thoughts fade away. Number 6, in addition to times where you pause for prayer, whenever you have free time, you must read the Holy Scripture. Step number 7, never spend an entire day without reserving some part of it for recollection and prayer. And step 8, as you prepare for sleep, try to examine yourself, particularly your thoughts and words and actions of the previous day. The handout that you guys now have goes a little more in depth with her words explaining each step a little bit more. And I believe these actions are a great first step into building a God-first schedule. I encourage you to set aside some time, whether it's this evening, whether it's tomorrow morning when you wake, to read through this, to reflect on this. There's a spot on the back for some notes where you can jot them down. You have your DR journal if you have one. Then you can jot in that and figure out, how might this look for your life? What might this look like? And I realize I just gave you a list of 8 things to try and add to your life. And that may seem kind of overwhelming and make you feel like I'm telling you to add more to your life instead of taking some away. But incorporating all 8 of these is a goal to aim for and not a realistic place to start. You might be doing some of these things already. But as you reflect and journal on these 8 practices, pick 2 or 3 that you prioritize incorporating into your day and see how it goes. God wants us to prioritize Him because He loves us and He longs to spend time with us. In putting God first in our schedules, He will show us how and where in our lives we can prioritize the right things over the wrong things, where and how we can simplify our commitments in favor of healthier rhythms and more time in His presence, and what we can add and what we can cut from our schedules. The second thing that is essential to do in simplifying our schedules is practice and maintaining a Sabbath. We need to not be going 100 miles an hour all the time. We need rest. We need time off. Finding a healthy work-life balance and maintaining the practice of Sabbath is crucial to simplifying our schedules. We can too easily become slaves to our time and schedules. We live in a culture of bondage. The 2 most powerful practices for becoming free of our particular kind of bondage are Sabbath keeping and tithing. The world preaches being a slave to your time, but God calls us to practice Sabbath to lift that burden. Life can and will be hard, both mentally and physically. The best thing we can do for our minds, bodies, and souls is to rest, to balance it out. We talk about Sabbath a lot here at DR because it's an important value of God's, and it's one that our culture really, really fights against. God invites us into a deliberate pattern of regular rest, both daily and weekly. Remember that rest is just so much more than sleep. Getting sleep is absolutely crucial, but rest is also about unplugging from our normal stressors of life and doing things that are life-giving and bring us joy. Practicing Sabbath, taking vacations, carving out time to spend with family and friends are all life-giving activities. Rest and do the things that in your life that give you life and fill your soul. This is all Sabbath. David tells us in the Psalms that God relishes to give us this kind of rest. It is useless for you to work so hard from early morning until late at night, anxiously working for food to eat, for God gives rest to His loved ones. These periods of rest are intended to be restorative for our minds, bodies, and souls, but there are also opportunities to take time to spend more with Jesus, to focus on our relationship with Him and let Him ease our souls so that we may be nearer to Him, and that when the time comes again for us to engage with our busy lives, that we will have His presence with us. We will have His rest. Then Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light." When we prioritize this kind of rest, keeping a Sabbath, we open up ourselves and our schedules to allow for intentional rest and the simplicity that God can provide us in this way. Now, the third and final thing I have to say this morning is very simple, but often the hardest to do. We need to find freedom in saying no. Hear me and believe me when I tell you, it is okay to say no. If a friend, a classmate, a family member, a coworker asks you for or to do something and you just don't have the capacity to do it, it is okay to say no. In believing the lies that we are always needed and that everything is important, we convince ourselves that we can never say no to any request, and we must not let anyone down. But we do so at the expense of our own sanity. And as we build our God-first schedules and prioritize Sabbathing, we will get a clear picture of what we do and don't have capacity for. What are the essential and non-essential things in our lives? And that will lead us to finding freedom, to saying no when we have to. Now, I struggle with all of this because it's hard. And we're constantly hearing messages that the world's way, that the way of busyness, is better than God's way. I had a super busy week this week. I was in pain from the shingles. I had to go in early and I was staying late at work. I wrote this message and still did not do a good job of this stuff this week. So it's hard and it takes time to build the habits and do it. But imagine what would happen if I did simple things like I turn my thoughts to God the first thing when I rise, or that when I lay in bed, I'm thinking and praying to God and reflecting on my day instead of doom scrolling my Instagram feed for delightful pictures like these. Sorry, I couldn't help but include just one more beautiful Rangies. What if I paused from time to time in a time of silence and prayer on my lunch break instead of just zoning out to music or sports talk radio? What if I truly and honestly set aside one full day with no commitments for true rest and Sabbath? What if I said no every once in a while to the requests that were put on me? By starting to incorporate some of these practices, we will get into the habit of orienting our minds and souls towards God, His truth, and the comfort and rest and rejuvenation He provides. And then we will begin to notice how we are sustained in Jesus even when life gets busy. Because of course, life will get busy. But when that happens, we will have the habits and the tools to make that busyness just a season, not a year-round thing. May we be people who prioritize God and His kingdom, not the world's priorities. May we strive to put God first in our lives and our schedules. And may we find freedom from the shackles of busyness when we rest and restore our souls in the arms of our Savior. Please pray with me. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you that you call us to simplicity in our lives and simplicity in our schedules. We know it's hard. We all have busy lives. We all have things we need to do, we feel like we need to do. We have demands that others are putting on us, Lord. But I ask that as we go through our week, this week, that we may do some true reflection, some honest reflection, and see what the truly important things in our lives are and what maybe some of the things that we're putting importance on really are ultimately a little trivial. May you help guide us into that freedom, and may we find rest and schedule rest with you so that you may restore our souls and help us continue refining our schedules and find simplicity in serving you first and honoring you first. And know that everything else will take care of itself after that. Pray this all in your name. Amen. Thank you for joining the Damascus Road podcast. Our mission is to follow Jesus together by being with God, loving everyone, transforming people, developing leaders, growing new ministries, and changing the world. You can find out more about us online at DamascusRoadTucson.com.